Here are 5 typical issues that can happen to your Nebari, the surface roots of your bonsai. Now, you might already have 1 or 2 of these problems and not know it. And even if not, it's pretty likely that you'll get all of these issues at some time in the future. At least your bonsai trees will. I'm not talking about typical problems with your root system, like pot bound or root rot or underdeveloped roots. No, in this video I'll show you 5 common issues with your bonsai's Nebari, and we're going to get to the root of the matter and fix those problems. Now let's get straight to the first problem. Now this is probably the most common Nebari problem, and once you see it you'll start noticing it on many bonsai. Take a look here and it will be obvious to you. It is of course the single dominant root. First, let's look at a good Nebari that is well balanced around the trunk and makes the tree appear firmly grounded. And now consider a tree that has one large surface root and not much else by way of Nebari. It looks unbalanced and unattractive. And if it's too big for the trunk, it's a dead giveaway that this is a bonsai under development. Now, it's not a solution to leave this forever and hope it sorts itself out, because it won't. That dominant root will just keep on growing bigger and will comparatively limit the growth of the other roots around the trunk base. On this sycamore pre-bonsai, I'm just going to get it open and quite enjoy this bit. So as you can see, I'm sawing off that big long root, and I'll show you exactly why in just a minute. I'm now potting up this pre-bonsai into a training pot, and we'll have another look at the roots in a year's time. Now this Zelkova has quite a bad case of the single dominant root. Now first things first, let's just get a bit of the moss off the surface here. So here we see the dominant root and it's quite big. Apart from taking all the energy and growing bigger just here, it's also arguably not natural looking. This doesn't look like a real tree, that looks like a dead giveaway that it's a bonsai that's been grown in a nursery somewhere. So how do we fix the dominant root problem? Well, we've got several options and they're all safest in spring when you're repotting. The first option is to saw the whole root off at the trunk. Now that's quite drastic and it'll produce a big calloused wound on the trunk over time, just like chopping off a branch. But the good news is, root growth will be more balanced around the rest of the trunk. Now the next option, slightly less drastic, is to cut the root at an angle. And this could be appropriate if you've got 2 or 3 dominant roots. It'll callus over at an angle, but with time you should be able to make that blend into the Nebari. Now the third option is especially good if your dominant root is quite wide. This time you use your saw to skillfully divide that wide root into 2 and carve some taper onto each one. The callusing will be on the insides and it could look more natural, but you're still left with a problem because that double root keeps on dominating the root growth, leaving the rest of the trunk base relatively bare. So that takes us to the next possible solution, and that is root grafting. Now this method requires that you've taken some cuttings and rooted them from this same tree about a year in advance. Then you treat each cutting like an approach graft. Then let it grow out for a year. Or maybe even 2. Then prune off the tops of the cuttings, leaving the roots growing successfully from the trunk. And after a few more years, look at that lovely Nebari. Now that's quite a lot of years to wait, but hey, there is a shortcut. This method doesn't guarantee results, but it's quicker than grafting, so it's worth a try. You drill holes where you want the roots to come out, and you fill the holes with rooting hormone. And cover those holes with damp sphagnum moss, the same as you would for an air layer. And thanks to my friends at the Mirasierra Bonsai Association for this drilling suggestion. Now it's possible that some of those holes will callus over, but the ones that don't should produce lovely roots. And if it doesn't work, you can always do root grafts next year. And if that doesn't work, you could start again and do a ground layer. We'll come on to that in a minute. And now we're back to my Zelkova broom, where we identified one problem, but there are actually more Nebari problems in there. You can see a problem of crossed roots. This upper root here has grown over this lower root here, and because of it, it's actually bowing upwards a bit before it goes down. Crossed roots happens when one surface root grows right over another. It grows tangentially instead of radially from the trunk, and it can bow upwards as it grows over the other root. Now fixing this is not strictly necessary as long as there are plenty of other surface roots, but if you do want to fix it, it's always easiest when the crossing root is young and supple. And if it's thin enough, you can uncross it and reposition it so it does grow radially from the trunk. But if that root has grown too big or firmly established, you'll need to prune it off and leave a stub because you might get a new radial root there. But if it's a really thick root, you'll need to decide, leave it be or saw it off. And the third problem is roots at different heights. Now you can see this one is a lot lower than this one. If I put this straight across, so it's too high that side and too low that side. Ideally, you want all the roots that form the Nebari to be at the same height. Unlike all the fixes in this video, this is much easier with a very young tree or a pre-bonsai. Simply put, you need to choose the roots that form your root plane and chop off the rest. And remember, only do this in springtime or late winter. If you're worried there aren't enough feeder roots on your chosen root plane, you always have the option of tourniqueting underneath that root plane. And we'll look at the tourniquet in just a minute. Now, what if you've got different root heights on a more established bonsai? Well, for formal uprights and brooms, you can either just bury the lower roots, or you can chop them off. But either way you'll be left with a bare section, so you'll still need to drill holes or do root grafts like we saw earlier. Now if it's an informal upright, you could quite simply repot it at a new planting angle that shows off all of the surface roots in a horizontal plane. However, that's no good for a broom style that needs to be vertical. Some people would say that's a beautiful looking root, but it's just way too big for the size of the tree, so it really has got to go. So I've got the chalk to draw a line around where I want the new roots to come. But that's the line I'd use if I was going to do a ground layer. So having identified the dominant root and the crossed root, and at different heights, what I'm going to do is cut off the top root that's crossing over, and then I'm going to drill holes here, 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 around there, cut one there, here, here, around there, one there. Now I'm going to cut into this bit here so I can get the saw a little bit into the wood. Now this moves nicely, and the cut I've made on the trunk I want to spray because we want to try and keep that cambium moist. So as I'm raking away all the soil, I see here a very good example of a wraparound root. Now if that's left there, as the trunk gradually grows wider, you can see where it has been digging in the past. And that's how you get these kind of lines around. Roots that wrap around the trunk cause problems because they block new roots from emerging radially from the trunk base. And if a root fuses with the trunk early on, they tend to graft together over time, and the trunk ends up with a bulge that looks like trunk flare, but it's not real Nebari. So the first fix is to catch this in time and snip off at that root at the base before it fuses with the trunk. But what if it is already fused and that bulge is already there? Well, your first option is to do nothing and live with it. Keep the bulge above the soil surface, pretend it's trunk flare and let new roots grow underneath. They'll become the Nebari one day. Another option is to do a ground layer where you ring bark the trunk just above the bulge, put some rooting hormone and cover it with sphagnum moss. Cover it with soil and keep it moist for 6 months. Now, ring barking is quite severe and risky, but there is an intermediate solution, the tourniquet. That is tourniqueting with a thick wire just above the bulge so that the wire just digs in a tiny bit to the bark. Then cover the whole thing in soil for 1 to 2 years, and you should get new roots emerging from where the tourniquet is digging in. And when there are enough roots, you can chop off the lower trunk at the next repotting. So you want to get rid of these wraparound roots as soon as you see them. So having really severely root pruned this Zelkover, I'm now going to put it in this training pot and then I'll do some drilling around the sides. Squish it down. So I want to make this line a little bit straighter. And then I apply some rooting hormone and sphagnum moss to keep the cambium moist and free of pathogens. And now it's time to drill holes where I want the roots to come out. If you're going to try this, I recommend a 5mm drill bit, that's 1/5 of an inch. And I put rooting hormone in every hole. I'm using a brush here, but as you'll see, it's a bit easier with a syringe. And once again applying sphagnum moss as an excellent growing medium for new fine roots. Now making sure to cover all of the moss with bonsai soil. And now a generous watering. Of course, when you look at the tree like this, it looks like there's no Nebari at all, which brings us on nicely to the 5th Nebari problem. Bonsai trees with no surface roots. Now it's worth saying that a bonsai doesn't categorically have to have visible Nebari, but if you do want to create surface roots, then some of the fixes we've already seen today can help, like ground layering, tourniqueting or drilling small holes. However, there's an easier course of action once you've got rid of the taproot and any deep, thick roots, and that is to plant the tree in a very shallow pot or even on a ceramic tile, so that all of the roots are forced to spread out radially, or even better still, to plant it right over a rounded stone. And that trick encourages the roots to spread outwards and gradually slope down into the soil, and over time that will create a much more natural looking Nebari and trunk flare. To see how to do that stone trick, take a look at this video.